The apartment smelled of instant coffee and defeat. Rachel Santos stood at the kitchen counter of her studio in East Los Angeles, watching steam rise from a chipped mug while her phone buzzed with the third call from the landlord this week. Rent was due yesterday. She had $47 in her checking account and a daughter who needed new shoes because the soles of her current pair had worn through completely, cardboard stuffed inside to make them last another week. At 38, Rachel had learned to measure her life in small catastrophes rather than grand failures. The divorce had taken a house. The layoff from the medical billing company had taken her stability. The custody battle had taken nearly everything else, leaving her with Emma 3 days a week and a legal bill that compounded monthly like interest on a loan she'd never requested. Emma slept on a fold-out futon in the corner, 11 years old and already accustomed to waking in spaces that felt temporary. Her backpack leaned against the wall, stuffed with homework she completed at the public library because the apartment's single overhead light wasn't bright enough for reading after dark. The girl had stopped asking when things would get better, had stopped expecting answers to questions that had no good responses. Rachel's phone lit up again. Not the landlord this time, but a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. A professional voice emerged from the speaker, female, measured, carrying news that felt too strange to be real. Ms. Santos, this is Patricia Morrison from Morrison Associates, estate attorneys. I'm calling regarding the estate of Alejandro Reyes, deceased March 14th. Our records indicate you're his niece and sole surviving heir. Uncle Alejandro. Rachel hadn't thought about him in 15 years, not since the family gathering where he'd announced he was moving to some small town in New Mexico to live simply and die quietly, as he'd put it. The family had written him off as eccentric, possibly unstable, definitely poor. He'd worked as a handyman, never married, never accumulated anything the family considered valuable. I'm sorry to hear he passed, Rachel said, the words automatic rather than emotional. But I don't understand why you're calling me. Mr. Reyes left you his property in Tierra Encantada, New Mexico. A small house and its contents. The estate is quite modest, but as his only living relative, you're entitled to claim it. There are some personal effects he specifically requested you receive. Rachel felt Emma's stir behind her, waking to the sound of conversation. What kind of property? A one-bedroom adobe house, approximately 800 square feet, built in 1947. According to county records, it hasn't been occupied since Mr. Reyes entered hospice care 6 months ago. The property taxes are current, but the structure requires some maintenance. Translation: falling apart. Rachel looked around her studio apartment, at the water stains spreading across the ceiling from the unit above, at the window that wouldn't close completely, at Emma sitting up now with sleepy curiosity in her eyes. Is there any value to it? I mean, could I sell it? Patricia's pause suggested she was choosing her words carefully. The real estate market in Tierra Encantada is limited. Population 2,100. No significant commercial development. Properties in that area typically sell for $30,000 to $50,000 if they sell at all. However, Mr. Reyes was quite specific in his will. He wanted you to see the house before making any decisions about its disposition. I can't afford to travel to New Mexico to look at a house worth less than my student loan debt. I understand, but there are personal effects Mr. Reyes wished you to have. A medicine cabinet, specifically. He left a note saying it had been in the family for generations and should remain with family. Rachel almost laughed. A medicine cabinet. Her uncle had died and left her a medicine cabinet in a falling-down house in the middle of nowhere. The absurdity of it felt like a perfect capstone to the past 3 years of accumulated disasters. Emma was at her elbow now, whispering loudly enough to be heard on the other end of the call. Mom, what's happening? Rachel covered the phone. My uncle died. Left me a house in New Mexico. Can we go see it? The question was so simple, so full of childish hope for adventure, that Rachel felt something crack in her chest. When was the last time she'd taken Emma anywhere? When was the last time they'd done anything that wasn't strictly necessary for survival? She uncovered the phone. Ms. Morrison, I'll need a few days to arrange time off work. There was a beat of silence. Miss Santos, I should mention. Mr. Reyes's funeral is tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Sacred Heart Chapel in Tierra Encantada. If you're able to attend, I could meet you there to discuss the estate in person. Rachel looked at her checking account balance on her phone. $47. The drive to New Mexico would cost maybe $100 in gas. Food along the way, another $50. They'd have to sleep in the car. Miss 3 days of her part-time retail job that paid $13 an hour and couldn't be bothered to offer benefits. I'll be there. After she hung up, Emma was looking at her with an expression that combined excitement and concern in equal measure. Are we really going? Yeah, baby. Pack a bag. Just essentials. They left before dawn, Rachel's 2009 Honda Civic loaded with everything they might need for a trip whose duration remained uncertain. Emma had chosen her clothes with the careful deliberation of someone who understood resources were limited and choices mattered. Rachel had thrown together a bag in 5 minutes, including the black dress she'd worn to her own father's funeral 4 years ago, the fabric slightly too tight now, but serviceable. The drive took 11 hours, including stops. Rachel kept the radio off to save battery, and they played games Emma invented, counting red cars, making up stories about the people in passing vehicles, geography quizzes using towns they passed. Somewhere in the empty stretch between Albuquerque and Socorro, Emma fell silent, staring out the window at landscape so vast and empty it seemed to erase the concept of destination entirely. Mom, why didn't Uncle Alejandro stay with the family? Rachel had been wondering when this question would come. He had a falling out with your grandmother. About money, I think. Family politics. He wanted to live differently than everyone else thought he should. What does that mean? It means he chose to be poor when he could have chosen to be comfortable. The family thought that was stupid. Emma processed this with the seriousness she brought to concepts she was testing against her own experience. Was he happy? I don't know, sweetie. I barely knew him. They reached Tierra Encantada as the sun was setting, the town materializing out of desert like a mirage that had decided to become permanent through sheer stubbornness. 1. Main Street, a church with a bell tower, a gas station that looked like it hadn't updated its prices since 1995, scattered houses spreading outward in no particular pattern. The motel Patricia had suggested was called the Desert Rose Inn, a single-story building with 8 rooms and a neon sign missing 2 letters. Rachel paid for 1 night with her credit card and tried not to think about the interest that would accumulate. The room smelled like bleach and old carpet, but the sheets were clean and the water in the shower ran hot enough to feel like luxury after 11 hours in the car. Emma fell asleep immediately, exhausted by travel and the kind of emotional processing children do silently. Rachel lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what she was doing here. Why she'd driven halfway across 2 states to attend the funeral of a man she barely remembered for a house she'd probably never be able to sell. The funeral the next morning was sparsely attended. 12 people in Sacred Heart Chapel, most of them elderly, faces weathered by decades of New Mexico sun. They sat in pews that had seen better days, singing hymns in Spanish that Rachel half remembered from childhood. Father Miguel, who looked to be in his 70s, delivered a eulogy that painted Alejandro as a man of simple faith and quiet generosity, someone who'd helped his neighbors without expectation of recognition or reward. Emma sat beside Rachel, holding her hand, watching everything with the focused attention of someone determined to remember details for later retelling. When Father Miguel invited people to share memories, an elderly woman in the front row stood with the careful effort of someone whose joints protested movement. Alejandro fixed my roof 3 years ago, she said in accented English. Would not take money. Said it was what neighbors do. When I tried to pay him, he told me to give the money to someone who needed it more. A man in his 50s stood next. He taught my son woodworking every Saturday for 2 years. Made him a better man than I could have alone. The stories continued, each one painting Alejandro as someone who'd given freely of skills and time, who'd lived modestly but died having enriched lives around him in ways that couldn't be measured in dollars. Rachel felt something uncomfortable rising in her chest. Guilt, maybe for having dismissed him as the family eccentric, regret for not having known him better, anger at herself for reducing his life to the property value of a house she'd never seen. After the service, Patricia Morrison approached. She was in her mid-50s, wearing a professional suit that looked out of place in the small chapel, carrying a leather folder that suggested competence and organization. "Miss Santos, I'm sorry for your loss. Would you like to see the property?" They followed Patricia's sedan and Rachel's Honda, driving through town and then out onto a dirt road that wound between low hills covered in scrub brush and resilience. The house appeared after 3 miles, sitting alone on a small rise, an adobe structure with a flat roof and small windows, built in the style of traditional New Mexican architecture that predated modern construction techniques by decades. Emma's first words were characteristically direct. "It's tiny." Patricia smiled. "Yes, it is, but it has character." They parked and approached on foot. The house showed its age in the weathered condition of the adobe, in the wooden door that had swollen with moisture and time, in a single cottonwood tree that had grown tall enough to provide shade across half the structure. But it hadn't collapsed. It stood solid, waiting with the patience of structures built to outlast their builders. Patricia unlocked the door with a key that looked older than Rachel. The interior smelled of dust and closure, of air that had been still for months. One main room served as combined living area and kitchen. A bedroom barely large enough for a double bed. A bathroom with fixtures from the 1960s. Everything clean but abandoned, frozen at the moment Alejandro had left for hospice care, knowing he wouldn't return. Emma moved through the space with the fearless curiosity of children, touching things gently, as though acknowledging their history. She found photographs on a shelf. Alejandro as a young man, serious-faced and lean. Family pictures that included Rachel's mother as a child. Images of people Rachel didn't recognize, but who shared features that marked them as family. "Mom, is this you?" Rachel looked at the photograph Emma held. A family gathering from maybe 25 years ago. Rachel at 13, sullen and uncomfortable in formal clothes. Alejandro in the background, watching everyone with an expression that suggested he was present but separate, participating but not belonging. "Yeah, baby, that's me." Patricia cleared her throat gently. "Miss Santos, I need to show you something specific." Mr. Reyes left very clear instructions. She led them to the bathroom. The medicine cabinet hung above the sink, a wooden piece that looked handmade, its door decorated with simple carved patterns that suggested craftsmanship from an era when such things were done by hand rather than mass-produced. He specified that you should take the medicine cabinet, said it had been in the family for 4 generations, built by his grandfather in 1889. Rachel opened the cabinet door. Empty shelves, nothing inside but dust and the faint smell of old wood. She couldn't imagine why this particular item mattered, but Alejandro had been specific about it, and that specificity suggested meaning she couldn't yet interpret. "I'll need to remove it from the wall. Do you have tools?" Patricia produced a screwdriver from her bag. "I anticipated you might want to examine it." Rachel worked carefully, removing screws that had held the cabinet in place for decades. Emma held a small flashlight from Patricia's bag, illuminating the work area with the seriousness of someone performing essential duty. When the last screw came free, Rachel lifted the cabinet away from the wall and felt the weight of it settle in her hands. The cabinet was heavier than it should have been for its size. She carried it to the main room and set it on the table where Alejandro had eaten his meals alone for years. In better light, the craftsmanship became more apparent. Dovetail joints, hand-planed wood, decorative carving that showed skill and patience. Emma ran her fingers over the carved patterns. "It's beautiful. Why would anyone make fun of her for taking this?" Patricia's expression shifted, surprise followed by realization. "I'm sorry, make fun of her?" Rachel felt heat rise in her face. "My sister. When I told her about the inheritance, she laughed. Said I was driving across 2 states for junk from a crazy old man. That I should just sign whatever papers and let someone else deal with it." "Your sister didn't understand what she was dismissing," Patricia said carefully. Rachel studied the cabinet more closely, looking for something that would explain why Alejandro had been so specific about it. She opened and closed the door, testing the hinges that still moved smoothly despite their age. She examined the carved patterns, trying to find meaning in designs that looked decorative but random. Emma was the one who noticed. "Mom, the back feels weird." She was right. The interior back panel didn't sit flush with the rest of the cabinet. Rachel ran her fingers along the edge and felt a slight gap, a space that shouldn't exist if the piece was solid construction. "Patricia, do you know anything about this cabinet having hidden compartments?" The attorney leaned closer. Mr. Reyes never mentioned anything like that, but he did say the cabinet had been in the family for generations. Perhaps there's more to discover. Rachel worked her fingernails into the gap and pulled gently. The back panel shifted slightly, but didn't release. She tried different angles, different amounts of pressure, aware that she was handling something old enough that forcing it could cause damage. "Here, let me try." Emma's smaller fingers found purchase where Rachel's couldn't. Together they applied steady pressure, and the panel began to slide upward with the resistance of wood that had swollen and settled over more than a century. When it finally came free, something fell from the cavity behind it onto the table with a sound like rain on metal. Rachel stared at what had been hidden for generations, her mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. Coins. Dozens of coins, maybe hundreds, spilling across the table in a cascade of gold that caught the afternoon light streaming through the window and threw it back like captured fire. Emma's whisper carried clearly in the sudden silence. "Mom, is that real gold?" Patricia picked up one of the coins with hands that trembled slightly. She examined it closely, turning it to catch the light, her professional composure cracking as she read the stamped date and denomination. "Ms. Santos, this is a $20 Liberty Gold piece. 1889. If it's authentic, and it appears to be, these coins are worth significantly more than their face value." She picked up another coin. 1891, another $20 piece. Her voice was rising with each discovery. 1893, 1887, 1895. These are all pre-1900 gold coins. Rachel's hands shook as she began counting. The coins kept coming as she and Emma carefully removed the false back completely, revealing a cavity that had been skillfully built into the medicine cabinet's construction. Not an afterthought, but part of the original design. A hiding place created by someone who'd anticipated the need to conceal wealth. Patricia was on her phone now, her professional detachment overwhelmed by the magnitude of the discovery. She spoke rapidly to someone on the other end, using terms Rachel only partly understood: numismatic value, mint condition, collector premium. When she hung up, her face had gone pale. "Miss Santos, I need to contact a specialist, but based on preliminary research, you understand that pre-1933 gold coins are highly sought by collectors, correct?" "I don't know anything about coin collecting. These aren't just gold by weight. They're historical artifacts. The $20 Liberty Gold pieces, depending on condition and rarity, can sell for anywhere from $2,000 to $50,000 each. Some rare dates command even higher prices." Emma was still counting coins, her lips moving silently as she organized them in careful rows. "Mom, there's 147 coins." Patricia did rapid calculation on her phone. Even at the conservative estimate of $2,000 per coin for common dates, that's $294,000. The number hung in the air like something that couldn't be real, couldn't be trusted, couldn't possibly apply to Rachel's life where numbers meant debt and deficiency rather than wealth and possibility. That can't be right. The actual value is likely much higher. Some of these dates. Patricia picked up a coin dated 1895. This year is particularly rare. This single coin could be worth $30,000 to $50,000 in the current market. Rachel sat down heavily in one of Alejandro's chairs, feeling the weight of discovery press against her chest like something physical. Emma came to stand beside her, small hand finding her mother's, squeezing once with the simple comfort children offer when adults seem overwhelmed. "Mom, Uncle Alejandro left this for you. He wanted you to have it." Patricia was already making calls, her professional training reasserting itself. We need to secure these immediately. I'll contact a numismatic specialist in Albuquerque. We'll need authentication, proper appraisal, secure storage. Ms. Santos, you cannot simply walk out of here with $300,000 in gold coins in a cardboard box. The reality of it was beginning to penetrate. The medicine cabinet her sister had mocked. The inheritance she'd driven 11 hours to see because she had no other options. The uncle the family had dismissed as poor and eccentric. All of it had been hiding this. Wealth accumulated over generations, preserved through a century of American history, concealed in plain sight in a bathroom cabinet. Emma was examining the empty cavity now, her flashlight revealing something else. "Mom, there's paper in here too." She extracted a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed with age but protected by the cavity's darkness. Rachel opened it with hands that still trembled, unfolding pages covered in careful handwriting she recognized as Alejandro's, though the ink had faded to brown with time. The letter was dated 6 months ago, written shortly before Alejandro had entered hospice. "Rachel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you found what I've kept hidden for 37 years. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but circumstances required it, and I'll explain. The medicine cabinet was built by my grandfather Tomas Reyes in 1889. He was a craftsman who worked in Santa Fe, making furniture for wealthy families. During the economic turmoil of the 1890s, he accumulated gold coins as insurance against paper currency collapse. Many people did this. It wasn't unusual. What was unusual is that he hid the coins so well that even family didn't know they existed. When he died in 1924, my father inherited the medicine cabinet without knowing its secret. It passed to me in 1987 when Dad died, and I discovered the cavity by accident while doing repair work. By then, I'd already learned what happened when the family knew someone had money. Your grandmother, my sister, spent her life fighting with relatives over my parents' estate. Legal battles that lasted years and cost more than the property was worth. She died bitter and broke, convinced everyone had cheated her. I decided then that I would never tell the family about the coins. I would live modestly, work honestly, and wait for the right person to receive them. Someone who would use the wealth wisely rather than let it destroy relationships the way it destroyed my sister's life. I chose you because you're the only one who never asked me for anything. The only one who didn't treat me differently after I left Los Angeles. The only one who seemed to understand that wealth and worth aren't the same thing. Use this gift to build a better life, but remember what I learned. Money solves financial problems, but it can't buy back time wasted in bitterness or relationships destroyed by greed. The medicine cabinet itself is worth keeping. Tomas built it to last centuries, and the craftsmanship represents values worth preserving. But the coins are yours to do with as you choose. I'm sorry I couldn't know you better. I'm sorry I lived so far from family who might have welcomed me if I tried harder to maintain connections. But I'm grateful I could leave you something that might make your life easier than mine was. With love, your Uncle Alejandro. Rachel read the letter twice while Emma looked at the coins spread across the table, organizing them by date with methodical care. Patricia had moved to the far side of the room, giving them privacy while making arrangements on her phone. "Mom," Emma's voice was small. "Does this mean we don't have to worry about rent anymore?" The question was so direct, so focused on immediate practical concerns, that Rachel felt tears gathering despite her efforts to maintain composure. Her 11-year-old daughter had learned to measure security in terms of whether they could afford the apartment, whether the landlord would call, whether they'd have to move again. "Yeah, baby, we don't have to worry about rent anymore." Emma processed this information with visible concentration. "Can I get new shoes?" "You could get new everything. And can we help other people too? Like Uncle Alejandro did?" The maturity of the question caught Rachel off guard. Emma had been paying attention to the funeral stories, had absorbed the lesson that Alejandro had tried to live by, that wealth meant opportunity to serve rather than just opportunity to consume. "Yes, we can help other people too." Patricia returned, her professional efficiency restored. "I've contacted Gregory Vance, one of the foremost numismatic experts in the Southwest. He's driving from Albuquerque tomorrow morning to perform initial authentication and appraisal. I've also arranged for secure storage at Wells Fargo in Albuquerque. We'll transport the coins there today. Today? I don't even know what they're worth yet. Which is exactly why we need to secure them immediately. Ms. Santos, you're currently in possession of potentially $300,000 to $500,000 in negotiable assets. Word travels fast in a small town. We need to protect these coins before their existence becomes public knowledge. The drive to Albuquerque took 2 hours, Patricia leading the way in her sedan, Rachel following with Emma and the medicine cabinet secured in the Honda's trunk. They didn't speak much during the drive, both of them processing what had happened in the span of hours that felt simultaneously too fast and perfectly timed. At the bank, they transferred the coins to a secure deposit box, each coin carefully documented and photographed. The bank manager, a woman named Margaret Shun, handled the process with the calm efficiency of someone accustomed to significant transactions, but even she paused when counting the coins. Ms. Santos, I'm going to recommend you speak with our private banking division. Assets of this magnitude require specialized services. Rachel almost laughed. 48 hours ago, she had $47 in her checking account. Now she was being directed to private banking services for assets she still couldn't quite believe were real. They returned to Tierra Encantada as sunset painted the desert in colors that seemed too intense to be natural. Patricia dropped them at the Desert Rose Inn with promises to call when Gregory Vance completed his authentication work. In the motel room, Emma fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. Rachel sat in the dark watching her daughter sleep, thinking about Alejandro's letter, about the family battles he'd described, about his decision to hide wealth rather than let it destroy relationships. Her phone buzzed. Her sister Mariana, calling for the third time since Rachel had texted her about finding something valuable in the medicine cabinet. Rachel let it go to voicemail. She wasn't ready yet to explain what they discovered, wasn't prepared for the family dynamics that would inevitably follow once news of the coin spread. Another text arrived, this one from her ex-husband David. Heard you came into some money. We should talk about increasing Emma's support. Rachel deleted it without responding. The speed at which information had traveled was alarming, but not surprising. Patricia had been right. Word traveled fast, and people who hadn't cared about Alejandro's death suddenly cared very much about what he'd left behind. Gregory Vance arrived at the Wells Fargo Bank in Albuquerque at precisely 9 a.m., carrying equipment that looked more appropriate for a surgical theater than a coin appraisal. He was in his early 60s, thin and precise, wearing white cotton gloves and carrying a leather case that contained magnification tools, measurement devices, and reference materials that appeared to predate digital photography. Rachel and Emma sat across from him in a private conference room while he examined each coin with the focused intensity of someone performing critical diagnosis. Patricia took notes, documenting his observations with legal precision. 1889 Liberty Head, Double Eagle, he murmured, turning the first coin under magnification. Negative 58 Australian dollars grade, I'd estimate. Nearly uncirculated. Minimal wear on the high points. Current market value, approximately $2,400. He set aside and picked up the next coin. 1891, similar condition. $2,300. Emma watched the process with fascination, her earlier fear of the coin's value transforming into curiosity about the authentication process itself. She asked questions Vance seemed pleased to answer: how he determined grade, what made certain dates more valuable, why condition mattered so dramatically. After the first hour, Vance paused to remove his glasses and clean them with deliberate care. His expression had shifted from professional detachment to something approaching excitement. Ms. Santos, you understand that what you have here is extraordinary, correct? Patricia said the coins might be worth $300,000. That was a conservative estimate before examination. I'm finding remarkably consistent high-grade preservation. Whoever stored these understood proper handling and protection. No cleaning damage, minimal environmental degradation, most grading negative 55 Australian dollars or better. He returned to the coins, moving faster now, his initial caution giving way to the efficiency of confirmed expertise. 1893s. This is significant. San Francisco mint mark, low mintage year. MS 62 grade. He consulted a reference book, running his finger down. Columns of numbers. Current auction record for MS 62 1893. S is $47,000. Rachel felt her breath catch. One coin worth $47,000. Patricia's pen paused mid-note. Vance continued through the collection methodically, occasionally stopping to verify details against his reference materials. The room fell into a rhythm, the soft click of coins being set on felt, the rustle of pages turning, Vance's quiet observations being recorded by Patricia's careful handwriting. 3 hours into the appraisal, he sat back and delivered his preliminary assessment. 147 coins total, dates ranging from 1850 to 1932, representing multiple mints and varying rarity levels. Overall collection condition is exceptional. Your ancestor clearly understood the importance of proper storage and minimal handling. He consulted his notes, adding figures with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this calculation hundreds of times. Conservative auction estimate, assuming standard dealer fees and normal market conditions, $294,000 to $340,000. However, if you're willing to be patient and work with specialized numismatic auction houses, possibly targeting collectors interested in complete date runs, the upper estimate could reach $425,000. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications Rachel was still processing. Emma's small voice cut through it. Mr. Vance, did Uncle Alejandro know how much they were worth? I can't say for certain, but given how carefully these were preserved, I suspect he understood their value. The real question is why he chose to hide them rather than sell them. Patricia answered before Rachel could. His letter explained that. He was protecting them from family conflict. He'd seen what inheritance battles had done to his sister. Vance nodded with the understanding of someone who'd witnessed similar situations. Wealth reveals character rather than creating it. Your uncle appears to have been a wise man. After Vance departed, Rachel sat with Emma in the conference room, while Patricia made calls to auction houses in New York and California. The magnitude of what they discovered was beginning to solidify into concrete reality. Numbers that meant Emma's education, a stable home, medical care without bankruptcy risk, the ability to help others the way Alejandro had. But it also meant attention Rachel hadn't sought and complications she'd spent years trying to avoid. Her phone had been buzzing continuously for the past hour. Mariana calling repeatedly. David sending increasingly aggressive texts about child support modifications. Her mother, who hadn't spoken to Rachel in 2 years, suddenly interested in reconnecting. Cousins she barely remembered existed requesting her contact information through social media. Patricia ended her call and sat across from Rachel with the expression of someone about to deliver complicated news. I've spoken with 3 major auction houses. All are very interested. Sotheby's is proposing a specialized estate sale in 6 months, estimates matching Vance's upper range. Heritage auctions can move faster, 12 weeks, but their estimate is slightly lower. There's also the option of private sale to a collector, which could happen within weeks, but might not achieve maximum value. What do you recommend? That depends on your immediate financial needs versus your patience for optimal outcomes. The longer timeline allows for better marketing, more competitive bidding, higher final prices. But it also means months of waiting while word spreads about what you've inherited. Emma had been listening quietly, but now she spoke with the directness that characterized her observations. Mom, people are already calling. They didn't care about us before, but now they do because we have money. The insight was accurate and painful. Rachel pulled her daughter close. Yeah, baby, that's exactly what's happening. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. Miss Santos, I need to be direct with you. Once the existence of these coins becomes public knowledge, and it will probably within days, you're going to face pressure from multiple directions. Family members claiming they deserve a share. Your ex-husband filing for custody modifications or increased support. Potentially even fraudulent claims against the estate. You need to prepare for that reality. How do I prepare for family turning into strangers? By establishing clear boundaries now. By consulting with a family law attorney about protecting Emma's interests. By making decisions based on what's right rather than what's expedient. Rachel thought about Alejandro's letter, about his choice to live in solitude rather than watch wealth destroy relationships. She thought about her sister's mocking laughter when she'd first mentioned the inheritance, about David's immediate calculation of how this windfall might benefit him, about relatives materializing from years of silence with sudden expressions of family loyalty. Patricia, I need to ask you something. In your professional opinion, what happens if I try to share this money with family members who start demanding it? The attorney's response was immediate and unequivocal. In my experience, it never ends. You give someone $10,000, they ask, why not $20,000? You give them $20,000, they argue they deserve more than someone else received. Money you give from generosity becomes money they believe they're entitled to. And the moment you say no to any request, you become the selfish one hoarding wealth that should belong to everyone. Emma was nodding, her young face showing understanding beyond her years. Like the kids at school who want to be my friend when I have good snacks, but ignore me when I don't. Exactly like that, sweetie. Rachel made a decision that felt simultaneously selfish and necessary. Then I'm not telling anyone the actual value. Let them think it's $30,000 or $40,000. Enough to be helpful, but not enough to be life-changing. Patricia smiled with approval. That's wise. I can help you craft appropriate responses to inquiries. But you should know, some people won't accept any answer that doesn't give them what they want. The first test of that strategy came that evening when Mariana appeared at the Desert Rose and having driven from Los Angeles without calling ahead. Rachel heard the knock and knew before opening the door that this confrontation had been inevitable since the moment she'd mentioned finding something valuable. Mariana stood in the doorway looking exactly as Rachel remembered. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes purchased on credit cards she couldn't afford, an expression that combined entitlement with barely concealed desperation. Rachel, we need to talk about Uncle Alejandro's estate. There's nothing to talk about. He left everything to me. Mariana pushed past into the room without invitation, her eyes scanning for evidence of the wealth she'd heard about through family gossip networks that operated with remarkable efficiency. Emma sat on the bed clutching. Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat she'd had since she was 3, watching her aunt with wary attention. I heard you found gold coins. In a medicine cabinet, I specifically told you was worthless junk. You did tell me that. So clearly I was wrong. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Rachel felt old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the younger sister deferring to the older, the pattern of accommodation that had characterized their relationship for decades. But something had changed in the past 48 hours. Maybe it was Alejandro's letter. Maybe it was Emma watching to see how her mother would respond to bullying. Maybe it was just exhaustion with being treated as though her needs mattered less than everyone else's wants. I'm going to do what Uncle Alejandro wanted. Use the inheritance to build a better life for Emma and myself. Mariana's laugh was sharp and bitter. Of course, Rachel gets everything while the rest of us get nothing. Do you have any idea how unfair that is? Unfair would be if you'd driven 11 hours to attend his funeral out of respect, only to be written out of the will. You didn't even know he died until I told you. That's not the point. That's exactly the point. You didn't care about him when he was alive. You don't get to care about what he left behind now that he's dead. Emma's small voice cut through the tension. Aunt Mariana, did you ever visit Uncle Alejandro? Even once? The question landed with the precision of a blade finding weakness in armor. Mariana's face flushed dark. That's not relevant to this conversation. It is relevant, Rachel said quietly. Because Uncle Alejandro left his estate to me specifically because I was the only one who never asked him for anything. The only one who didn't treat him differently based on what he owned. He wrote that in his letter. What letter? Rachel retrieved the letter from her bag and handed it over. Mariana read it with an expression that shifted from skepticism to anger to something that might have been shame if she'd been capable of that particular emotion. When she finished, she folded the letter with precise violence. So he was just as crazy as everyone said, hoarding wealth while living in poverty, writing paranoid letters about family greed. He wasn't paranoid. He was accurate. You've proven that by showing up here demanding money, you have no legal or moral right to claim. I'm family. Family means showing up when it's inconvenient, when there's nothing to gain, when all you can offer is presence. You don't get to invoke family obligations you've never honored and expect them to work in your favor now. Mariana stood with the stiff posture of someone whose script had been disrupted and who lacked the flexibility to improvise. You're making a mistake. The family will hear about this. Everyone will know how selfish you're being. Let them know. I'd rather be called selfish by people who want my money than be actually selfish by taking something that wasn't earned and pretending it creates obligation. After Mariana left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame, Emma came to sit beside Rachel on the bed. They sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Mom, was that hard? Yeah, baby, that was hard. But you did it anyway. Sometimes the right thing is also the hard thing. Emma processed this with her characteristic seriousness. Are more people going to come? Are they all going to be like Aunt Mariana? Rachel pulled her daughter close, feeling the weight of what was coming settle across her shoulders like a physical burden. Probably, but we'll handle them the same way, with honesty and boundaries. The next assault came through legal channels rather than emotional manipulation. David filed an emergency motion for modification of custody and child support 3 days after news of the inheritance spread through family networks and into his awareness through means Rachel didn't bother trying to trace. The paperwork arrived via certified mail at the Desert Rose Inn, where Rachel and Emma had remained while waiting for the auction house arrangements to finalize. Patricia reviewed the motion with the grim expression of someone who'd seen this tactic before. He's claiming that your financial windfall demonstrates previous misrepresentation of your income level during the divorce proceedings. He's requesting full custody based on allegations that you deliberately concealed assets, plus retroactive child support payments totaling $47,000. Rachel felt cold fury rise in her chest. I didn't have any assets to conceal. I was working retail and living in a studio apartment. I know that. You know that. But David's attorney is arguing that your sudden wealth proves you must have had hidden resources all along. It's nonsense legally, but it's designed to pressure you into settlement. What kind of settlement? Probably 50% of the coin proceeds in exchange for dropping the custody challenge and support claims. Emma had been pretending not to listen while reading in the corner, but now she set her book aside. Dad wants half of Uncle Alejandro's money? Even though Uncle Alejandro left it to Mom, not him? That's exactly what he wants, sweetie. That's stealing. Patricia's smile was fierce. You're absolutely right, and we're going to fight it. But Rachel, you need to understand, this is going to get worse before it gets better. David is desperate. Men like him don't accept that their ex-wives might have resources they can't access and control. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, giving Rachel time to secure proper legal representation. Patricia recommended a family law specialist in Albuquerque named Marcus Chun, who'd built a reputation for aggressive defense of parental rights in high-asset divorces. Marcus turned out to be in his late 40s, compact and intense, with the focused energy of someone who treated every case as personal warfare. His consultation style was direct, to the point of brutal. Your ex-husband is an asshole. That's my professional legal opinion. But being an asshole isn't grounds for dismissal of his motion. We need to build a case that demonstrates 3 things. 1, the inheritance was unknowable and therefore couldn't have been concealed. 2, your current lifestyle and parenting haven't changed despite the financial windfall. 3, his sudden interest in increased custody correlates exactly with his knowledge of your assets, proving his motivation is financial rather than parental. Can we prove all that? We can prove enough to make his attorney regret filing, but it's going to require discipline from you. No major purchases, no lifestyle changes, no social media posts about the inheritance. You need to continue living exactly as you were before this money existed, at least until the hearing is over. Rachel looked at Emma, at the worn shoes she still wore, because Rachel had been following Marcus's advice without being told. At the motel room that had become their temporary home, because moving to something better would undermine their legal position. At the future they couldn't access yet, because the present required strategic poverty. How long do we have to keep pretending the money doesn't exist? Until we win the custody hearing and the appeals period expires. Probably 4 to 6 months total. Emma's voice was small but determined. We can do that, right, Mom? We've been doing it our whole lives anyway. The truth of that observation cut deep. They had been living in strategic poverty not by choice, but by circumstance. And now circumstances had changed, but strategy required maintaining the appearance of nothing having shifted at all. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified from multiple directions simultaneously. Rachel's mother called daily, her messages shifting from concerned to accusatory to threatening. Cousins appeared in Tierra Encantada, asking questions about the estate, some hinting at legal challenges, others requesting loans they had no intention of repaying. The most painful betrayal came from her childhood friend Lisa, who'd stood beside Rachel during the divorce and offered support through the hardest months. Lisa called with a request that sounded reasonable until examined closely. Rachel, I heard about your inheritance. I'm so happy for you. Listen, Marcus and I are behind on our mortgage. 3 months. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I hate to ask, but could you loan us $15,000? We'll pay you back as soon as Marcus's business picks up. Rachel had heard variations of this request a dozen times in the past month, but hearing it from Lisa hurt worse than all the others combined. Lisa, I can't. The money is tied up in legal proceedings because of David's custody challenge. I literally cannot access it without jeopardizing my case. I'm not asking for the whole inheritance. Just $15,000. That's nothing compared to what you have. It's not about the amount, it's about priorities. I've been there for you through everything. I helped you move. I watched Emma when you couldn't afford childcare. I thought we were friends. The weaponization of past kindness felt like a violation worse than the request itself. Rachel kept her voice steady through force of will. We are friends, which is why I need you to understand that I can't help right now without risking Emma's custody. Please don't make me choose between helping you and protecting my daughter. I guess I know where I rank. The line went dead. Rachel sat staring at her phone, feeling the particular pain of relationships ending not through conflict but through the revelation that they'd been transactional all along. Emma had been listening from the bathroom where she was brushing her teeth. She emerged with toothpaste foam still around her mouth. Was that Miss Lisa? Yeah. Is she mad because you can't give her money? Yeah. Emma rinsed and spit, then turned to face her mother with an expression older than 11. Uncle Alejandro was right. Money shows who people really are. The insight was accurate and devastating. Over the past month, Rachel had learned exactly who her family and friends were, or more precisely, who they'd always been beneath the surface relationships she'd mistaken for genuine connection. But not everyone revealed themselves as opportunists. Father Miguel from Sacred Heart Chapel called one evening with a request that surprised Rachel with its thoughtfulness. Miss Santos, I heard about your inheritance. I'm calling to ask if you'd consider a donation to our parish food bank. We serve 140 families monthly, many of them elderly or disabled. Any amount would help. Father, I appreciate you asking, but my attorney advised me not to make any major financial decisions until legal matters are resolved. I understand completely. When your situation stabilizes, if you're still interested, please know we'd be grateful. But there's no pressure. I'm calling primarily to offer support. Your uncle spoke highly of you during his final weeks. He believed you had a generous heart. I wanted you to know that generosity can wait until it's wise as well as kind. The conversation left Rachel feeling both validated and challenged. Here was someone asking for help who also respected her boundaries, who understood that timing mattered, who offered relationship rather than simply demanding resources. She mentioned the call to Patricia during their next meeting. The attorney nodded with approval. That's the difference between legitimate need and exploitation. Father Miguel asked, accepted your answer, and offered continued relationship regardless of your financial decision. That's how actual community works. So, I should help the church once this is over? That's your decision to make. But yes, directing resources toward organizations that serve genuine need without demanding entitlement. That's probably what your uncle would have wanted. The auction preparations moved forward despite the legal complications. Heritage Auctions scheduled the estate sale for October, 5 months after the discovery. Their marketing materials described the collection as an exceptional accumulation of pre-1933 U.S. gold coinage and projected conservative estimates that matched Vance's initial assessment. Rachel reviewed the auction catalog with Emma one evening, both of them marveling at how their lives had been transformed by a medicine cabinet her family had mocked. The professional photographs made the coins look even more impressive than they had spread across Alejandro's table, each one lit and positioned to highlight the craftsmanship and historical significance. "Mom, do you think Uncle Alejandro would be happy about what we're doing?" Rachel thought about the question carefully. "I think he'd be happy we're being careful, that we're protecting ourselves first before trying to help others. That we're learning who actually cares about us versus who just cares about what we have." And after the auction, after we have the money for real, after the auction, we figure out how to live differently without becoming different people. The custody hearing arrived on a Tuesday morning in late August. Rachel wore the same black dress she'd worn to Alejandro's funeral, the fabric still slightly too tight but acceptable for court appearances. Emma sat beside her, wearing her best school clothes, hands folded in her lap with the careful composure of someone who understood that adults would be making decisions about her life. David sat across the courtroom with his attorney, a sharp-suited woman named Jennifer Caldwell, who specialized in high-asset divorce modifications. He looked prosperous in ways he hadn't during their marriage. New suit, expensive watch, the grooming of someone who'd come into money or the expectation of it. Marcus leaned over to whisper to Rachel, "He's performing for the judge, trying to look like the stable parent with resources. Don't react. Just let me handle this." Judge Maria Sandoval entered, and the hearing began with the procedural formality that characterized family law proceedings. Caldwell presented David's case with practiced efficiency, allegations of hidden assets, claims of lifestyle inconsistency, requests for full custody based on Rachel's alleged financial deception. The argument was clever, Rachel had to admit. It reframed her inheritance not as luck but as evidence of hidden wealth, suggested that her poverty had been performance rather than reality, positioned David as the wrong party seeking fairness rather than opportunistic predator seeking windfall. Marcus's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Santos, when did you first learn about Ms. Santos's inheritance?" "About 6 weeks ago." "And when did you file this motion?" 3 days later. "In your 16 years of knowing Ms. Santos, including 8 years of marriage, did you ever suspect she had hidden assets?" David hesitated. "No, but yes or no, Mr. Santos?" "No." "Did Ms. Santos know her uncle Alejandro possessed valuable assets?" "I don't know what she knew." "Did you know?" "No." "So neither of you had any reason to believe the inheritance existed before it was discovered, correct?" "That's what she claims." Marcus produced Alejandro's letter and death certificate. "Mr. Santos, this letter from Alejandro Reyes is dated 6 months before his death. It explicitly states that he never told family about the coins because he feared they would cause conflict. The letter was sealed and hidden with the coins. Ms. Santos couldn't have known about either until she physically removed the medicine cabinet from the wall. Does that sound like hidden assets or inherited surprise?" Caldwell objected, but the damage was done. Marcus had established timeline and intent, had demonstrated that the inheritance was genuinely unknowable rather than deliberately concealed. The examination continued for 2 hours. Marcus methodically destroyed every component of David's case, showed that Rachel's lifestyle hadn't changed despite the inheritance, proved that Emma's care and education had remained consistent, documented that David's sudden interest in increased custody correlated exactly with his knowledge of valuable assets. When Emma was called to testify, Rachel felt her stomach tighten with protective instinct. But Marcus had prepared her daughter well, and Emma answered questions with the honesty of someone too young to perform for advantage. Emma, do you feel safe with your mother? Yes. Has anything changed in how she takes care of you since she inherited the coins? She bought me new shoes. The old ones had holes. Anything else? No. We still live in the same motel room. We still eat the same food. She still helps with my homework every night. Caldwell tried to shake her testimony. Emma, your mother inherited a lot of money. Hasn't she bought anything expensive? Taken you anywhere special? Mr. Chun said, we had to keep living the same way until after court. So we did. Don't you want nice things? Emma's response was pure and devastating. I want my mom. The nice things can wait. Judge Sandoval called a recess, and when she returned 30 minutes later, her decision was clear in her expression before she spoke. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. Mr. Santos's motion appears to be motivated by financial opportunism rather than genuine parental concern. The inheritance in question was unknowable, discovered through chance after the death of a relative, and cannot reasonably be characterized as hidden assets during divorce proceedings that concluded 18 months ago. Furthermore, Ms. Santos has demonstrated remarkable restraint and appropriate priorities by maintaining her daughter's stability despite sudden financial resources. She has not changed residences, has not made extravagant purchases, has not altered Emma's routine or care in ways that suggest instability or poor judgment. Mr. Santos's motion is denied in its entirety. Custody arrangements remain as previously ordered. Child support obligations remain unchanged. The court finds no basis for retroactive support claims or modification of existing agreements. Additionally, I'm awarding attorney's fees to Ms. Santos in the amount of $18,000 to be paid by Mr. Santos within 90 days. Frivolous litigation designed to extract settlement through intimidation will not be rewarded in my courtroom. The gavel came down with finality. David's face went dark with rage, barely contained. Caldwell gathered her materials in silence that suggested professional embarrassment. Marcus leaned over to Rachel. We won. Completely. Emma threw her arms around her mother's waist, holding tight enough that Rachel felt it in her ribs. They left the courtroom together, stepping into August heat that felt like liberation after months of strategic poverty and legal uncertainty. That evening, Rachel made 2 phone calls. The first was to Heritage Auctions, confirming that the sale could proceed as planned in October. The second was to Father Miguel, asking about the food bank's needs and how she might help once the auction concluded. Emma listened to both calls, then asked the question that had been building since the hearing ended. Mom, can we move out of the motel now? Can we get a real home? Rachel thought about Alejandro's letter, about his warning that money solved financial problems but couldn't buy back time or relationships. She thought about the family members who'd revealed themselves as opportunists, about the friends who'd disappeared when she couldn't provide resources, about the hard lessons learned through months of pressure and conflict. Yeah, baby, we can get a real home, but we're going to do it carefully. We're going to build something that lasts. The auction in October exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Collectors from across the country bid aggressively on coins that had been preserved in exceptional condition for over a century. The 1895 S. Liberty Double Eagle alone sold for $53,000. The complete collection realized $427,000 after fees and commissions. Rachel received the wire transfer on a Wednesday afternoon. Watching her bank balance transform from the $3,200 she'd been living on to a number that still didn't feel entirely real. She sat in the parking lot of Wells Fargo for 20 minutes, Emma beside her, both of them processing what this meant. Mom, what do we do first? Rachel had been thinking about this question for months, had made lists and revised them, and thrown them away, and started over. But the answer had clarified during the long wait between discovery and realization. First, we find a home. Not too big, not too expensive. Something we can actually afford to maintain, even if nothing else ever goes right again. And then we help the People Uncle Alejandro would have wanted us to help. They bought a modest three-bedroom house in Albuquerque, carefully chosen for good schools and reasonable property taxes. Rachel paid cash, avoiding mortgage payments that would have consumed income she still earned through part-time work she maintained deliberately. The house cost $185,000, leaving the majority of the inheritance untouched for other purposes. Emma got her own room for the first time in her life, and she decorated it with the careful thought of someone who understood that permanence was precious. Rachel created a home office where she could work remotely for a nonprofit she joined, using skills developed during years of financial struggle to help other families navigate economic hardship. The medicine cabinet hung in their hallway, restored professionally but maintaining its original character. Emma had insisted on keeping it despite offers from collectors who recognized its craftsmanship and historical significance. Uncle Alejandro wanted us to remember what it represented, she'd said. We should keep it where we can see it every day. Rachel established a trust fund for Emma's education, fully funded to cover undergraduate and graduate degrees at any institution she might choose. The fund was structured to provide support without creating entitlement, designed to launch Emma into adulthood rather than creating dependence. She donated $50,000 to Sacred Heart Chapel's food bank, enough to operate for 2 years without additional fundraising. Father Miguel wept when she handed him the check, and his tears felt like validation that generosity could exist without exploitation. She established a small foundation focused on helping single mothers in emergency situations. First month's rent, security deposits, car repairs that meant the difference between keeping and losing employment. The foundation operated quietly, without publicity, distributing resources through social workers and nonprofit partners who identified genuine need. Mariana never spoke to her again. David paid his court-ordered attorney's fees and disappeared from Emma's life beyond minimum required visitation. The cousins who'd appeared demanding shares eventually stopped calling when it became clear that Rachel's boundaries were permanent rather than negotiable. But Lisa called one evening, 6 months after their painful conversation. Her voice was different, smaller, uncertain, carrying shame she'd apparently spent months processing. Rachel, I need to apologize. What I said about the money, about priorities, I was wrong. You were protecting Emma, and I made it about me. That wasn't fair. It wasn't friendship. Rachel had rehearsed this conversation in her mind dozens of times, had prepared speeches about boundaries and betrayal and the difference between relationship and transaction. But when the moment arrived, she found she didn't need the speeches. I appreciate you calling. That takes courage. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not. But I'm offering it anyway, because holding on to anger is exhausting, and life is too short to spend it being exhausted. The friendship rebuilt slowly, carefully, with both of them more honest about limitations and needs than they'd been before. It wasn't the same relationship it had been, but it was more real, and reality mattered more than comfort. On the first anniversary of Alejandro's death, Rachel and Emma drove to Tierra Encantada for a memorial service Father Miguel had organized. 20 people attended, most of them elderly, all of them people Alejandro had helped during his years in the community. They shared stories, roofs repaired, furniture built, emergency assistance provided without fanfare or expectation of recognition. Emma listened with the focused attention of someone determined to understand the kind of person her great-uncle had been, the values he'd lived rather than merely proclaimed. After the service, they drove to Alejandro's house, which Rachel had decided to keep rather than sell. She'd hired a property manager to maintain it and had begun renting it at below-market rates to families who needed temporary housing during difficult transitions. Emma walked through the small rooms with the familiarity of someone who'd been here before, touching things gently as though acknowledging their history. In the bathroom, where the medicine cabinet had hung, a small plaque now read, Alejandro Reyes lived here 1987 to 2024. He understood that wealth means opportunity to serve. Mom, do you think we did what Uncle Alejandro wanted? Rachel considered the question carefully. I think we're trying. I think we're learning. I think that's probably enough. They stood together in the small house that had hidden fortune and revealed character, in the place where one man's choice to live simply had created opportunity for his descendants to live meaningfully. Outside, desert stretched toward mountains and distances that suggested possibility rather than emptiness. Inside, a medicine cabinet's absence marked the space where discovery had begun and transformation had started its slow, deliberate work. Emma pulled out her phone and took a photograph of the empty wall, adding it to the collection she'd been building since that first day at the motel. Before and after, she said. Except this time, it's not about the house. It's about us. Rachel looked at her daughter and saw someone who understood that inheritance meant more than wealth received, that legacy lived in choices made rather than possessions accumulated, that the most valuable thing Alejandro had left them wasn't coins, but the wisdom to use them well. Yeah, baby, it's about us, about who we were and who we're becoming. And in the quiet of that small house in New Mexico, where a man had lived modestly and died having enriched more lives than he'd ever known, that seemed like exactly the right measure of success. 2 years after the discovery, Rachel stood in the conference room of Reyes Family Foundation headquarters, a modest office suite in a converted warehouse in Albuquerque's downtown district. The space was deliberately unpretentious, chosen to signal that overhead costs wouldn't consume donations that should reach people in need. Emma, now 13 and showing the first signs of adolescence in her changing frame and deepening voice, was reviewing grant applications with the seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. She'd become the foundation's unofficial youth advisor, reviewing requests with an eye toward identifying genuine need versus practice manipulation. Mom, this one. She slid a folder across the table. Single mother, 2 kids, eviction notice due in 5 days. She's been working 2 jobs, but her car broke down and she couldn't get to work for a week. Lost one of the jobs. The math works out. She needs $2,800 for rent and late fees to avoid homelessness. Rachel reviewed the application, recognizing her own history in the desperate details. This could have been her 2 years ago, one mechanical failure away from losing everything, one missed paycheck from eviction. Approved. Get the check to her caseworker by tomorrow. Already drafted it. Just needed your signature. The foundation had distributed $127,000 over the past 18 months to 43 families in crisis situations. Each case was carefully vetted, each dollar tracked, each outcome documented. Rachel had hired a small staff, 2 case managers and a part-time accountant, who shared her philosophy that help should be immediate, adequate, and free of judgment. The work was exhausting and necessary and deeply satisfying in ways her previous career in medical billing had never approached. She was using skills developed through survival, the ability to stretch resources, to prioritize competing urgent needs, to recognize the difference between genuine crisis and manufactured drama, to help others navigate circumstances she understood intimately. Maria Chun, the foundation's senior case manager, entered with her laptop and the expression that meant complicated news. She was in her early 50s, a former social worker who'd left county employment after watching bureaucracy prevent her from actually helping people. Rachel, we have a situation. Remember the Torres family from 3 months ago? We paid their rent and utilities, got them stable? Yeah, 2 kids. Father lost his job in the oil industry downer. We helped them avoid eviction while he found new work. He found work. Good job, actually. And now his sister is calling asking for similar help. Says if we helped her brother, we should help her too. Family fairness. Rachel felt the familiar tightness that came with navigating boundaries between generosity and obligation. What's her situation? Behind on car payments. Not in danger of repossession yet, but getting close. No immediate housing threat. Kids are fine. Essentially, she's in the same situation thousands of working families are in, struggling but not in crisis. So not foundation appropriate. Correct. But she's framing it as though we owe her help because we helped her brother. Says it's not fair that some family members get assistance and others don't. Emma looked up from the grant applications. But we don't help people because of fairness. We help people because of crisis. There's a difference. Maria smiled. Exactly right. But explaining that difference to people who want help they're not eligible for is where this job gets hard. Rachel took the call in her office, a small room with a window overlooking the street and a desk made from reclaimed wood that Emma had helped her refinish. The conversation unfolded exactly as she'd anticipated. Reasonable request escalating to entitled demand when the answer wasn't immediate approval. Mrs. Torres, I understand you're struggling with car payments. That's genuinely difficult. But the Foundation's mission is emergency assistance for families facing imminent homelessness or loss of essential utilities. You're not in that situation yet. But you helped my brother. How is that fair? Your brother was 48 hours from eviction with 2 children and no shelter options. The situations aren't comparable. So because I've managed my money better, because I'm not in crisis yet, I don't deserve help? The logic was seductive and fundamentally flawed. Rachel had her variations of it dozens of times. The argument that competence should be punished and crisis rewarded, that helping those in immediate danger somehow created unfairness to those managing to avoid disaster. Mrs. Torres, if we help everyone who's struggling, we won't have resources to help anyone in actual emergency. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. The line went dead. Maria appeared in the doorway moments later. She's already posting on social media about how the Foundation helped her brother but refused to help her. Accusations of favoritism and selective generosity. Let her post. We can't control how people respond when they don't get what they want. But the incident was symptomatic of a larger pattern Rachel had been noticing. As the Foundation's work became more visible, requests had increased exponentially, from 12 applications monthly in the first year to over 60 in recent months. Many were legitimate, many were not. And distinguishing between genuine need and opportunistic request required constant vigilance that was emotionally exhausting. That evening, Rachel and Emma sat at their kitchen table reviewing Foundation finances. The remaining inheritance principal had been invested conservatively, generating modest returns that funded operations while preserving capital. But the math was becoming concerning. Mom, at our current distribution rate, we're spending down principal by about $40,000 annually. We could sustain that for maybe 8 more years before we have to shut down or dramatically reduce services. Rachel looked at her 13-year-old daughter performing financial analysis with the competence of someone twice her age and felt pride mixed with concern. Emma had grown up fast, maybe too fast, shaped by poverty and windfall and the responsibility of managing both. What do you think we should do? Emma had clearly been contemplating this question. I think we need to be more selective. Help fewer families, but help them more completely. Right now, we're giving $2,000 to $4,000 per crisis, which prevents immediate disaster, but doesn't create stability. What if we gave $10,000 to $15,000 to fewer families, enough to actually change their trajectory instead of just delaying the next emergency? The suggestion was strategically sound and emotionally difficult. It meant saying no more often, helping fewer people, accepting that resources were finite and choices had consequences. That's wise thinking, baby. But it also means we'll have to turn away a lot of people in genuine need. We're already doing that. We rejected 31 applications last month because we didn't have enough funding. At least if we help fewer families more substantially, the ones we do help might actually escape the poverty cycle instead of just surviving another month. Rachel made the decision that night to restructure the Foundation's approach. They would reduce the number of grants, but increase the average award size. They would implement more rigorous vetting and require longer-term follow-up. They would focus on families where comprehensive support might create permanent improvement rather than temporary relief. The decision was announced through the Foundation's website and social media channels. The response was immediate and polarized. Recipients of past grants praised the new approach. People who had been hoping for assistance accused the Foundation of elitism and abandoning its mission. One comment on Facebook captured the anger. So now you'll only help people who meet your arbitrary standards of deserving? What happened to helping everyone in need? Emma read the comments with visible frustration. Don't they understand that we can't help everyone? That trying to help everyone means helping no one adequately? They understand. They just don't care because it doesn't give them what they want. The restructured approach was tested 2 weeks later when an application arrived that challenged every assumption Rachel had made about identifying genuine need versus sophisticated manipulation. The applicant was Melissa Richardson, a woman in her early 30s who presented as articulate, organized, and desperately in need of exactly $12,500 to avoid losing custody of her 3 children due to substandard housing conditions. The application was impeccable: detailed budget, thorough documentation, testimonial letters from her caseworker and her children's school counselors. Maria conducted the initial interview and returned with concerns that were difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. Something feels off. I can't pinpoint what exactly, but the story is almost too perfect. Every detail aligns exactly with our grant criteria. The amount requested is precisely calculated to seem substantial without being excessive. The timeline creates urgency without allowing time for thorough verification. Emma was listening from the corner where she'd been reviewing other applications. What did her caseworkers say when you called? Confirm the basic facts. Kids are in good health. Mother is engaged with school activities. Housing is substandard, but not immediately dangerous. The caseworker seemed careful, like she was choosing words precisely. Rachel trusted Maria's instincts. The woman had been a social worker for 20 years and had developed radar for situations that looked right on paper but felt wrong in practice. What do you recommend? More time, more verification. Contact the landlord directly. Talk to references beyond the one she provided. Maybe visit the housing situation ourselves. The decision to delay was made easier by the fact that the custody hearing Melissa claimed was imminent turned out to be scheduled for 6 weeks out, not 6 days as her application had suggested. The urgency that had seemed to require immediate approval dissolved under scrutiny. Over the following week, Maria conducted deeper investigation. The landlord confirmed the housing conditions, but also mentioned that Melissa had lived there for 4 years without previous complaints. The school counselor, when pressed, admitted that the testimonial letter had been written at Melissa's specific direction, using language she provided. The caseworker, reached after hours, was more forthcoming, expressing concern that Melissa was very good at presenting herself as the perfect victim. The full picture emerged slowly. Melissa wasn't fabricating crisis so much as optimizing reality to match grant criteria. Her housing was genuinely substandard, but not because of poverty. She could afford better, but chose to spend money elsewhere. Her custody concerns were real, but not immediate. Her children's needs were legitimate, but not unique. She was essentially a woman who'd learned to navigate social services with the skill of someone who'd studied the system and knew exactly which buttons to press. Rachel made the difficult call personally. Ms. Richardson, after thorough review, we've determined that your situation doesn't meet our criteria for emergency assistance. We're denying your application. The response was immediate and furious. You people are all the same. You claim to help families, but you're just gatekeepers protecting money for yourselves. My children are going to suffer because you're too selfish to help. Ms. Richardson, your children are not in immediate danger. Your housing, while not ideal, meets minimum standards. Your custody hearing is 6 weeks away, giving you time to address concerns through other resources. Our foundation exists to prevent imminent homelessness and loss of essential services. That's not your situation. How dare you judge whether my need is legitimate? I'm not judging legitimacy. I'm assessing urgency. There's a difference. The call ended with threats of social media exposure and legal action, neither of which materialized. But the incident stayed with Rachel, highlighting the difficulty of distinguishing between people who needed help and people who wanted help, between crisis and mere difficulty, between using resources wisely and being accused of gatekeeping by anyone denied access. The Foundation's work continued through the fall, with increasing focus on comprehensive assistance rather than emergency relief. They helped 7 families that quarter, down from 23 the previous quarter, but the average grant size increased to $14,000 and included follow-up services, financial counseling, employment assistance, connection to long-term support resources. One of those families was the Johnsons, Thomas and Patricia, and their 4 children, ranging in age from 3 to 12. They'd been living in their car for 6 weeks after Thomas's construction job ended and Patricia's retail position couldn't cover rent alone. The foundation provided $15,000 for first month's rent, security deposit, utility connections, and essential furniture. But more importantly, Maria worked with them for 3 months afterward, helping Thomas find stable employment, connecting Patricia with job training programs, ensuring the children enrolled in school with proper supplies and support services. The Johnsons sent updates every few months, photographs of the kids in their new home, report cards showing improved grades, thank you notes written in careful handwriting that showed genuine gratitude rather than performed appreciation. Those updates sustained Rachel through the harder moments, the rejected applications that generated anger, the accusations of elitism from people who didn't understand resource limitations, the exhaustion of constantly defending decisions to help some people substantially rather than helping everyone inadequately. Emma turned 14 in December, and Rachel threw her a party at their home, the first real birthday celebration they'd had in years. 12 of Emma's friends attended, along with foundation staff and a few of the families they'd helped. The house filled with laughter and noise and the particular chaos of teenagers who felt safe enough to be loud. Patricia Johnson brought a cake she'd made herself, decorated with careful frosting flowers that showed more love than skill. We wanted to contribute something. You gave us so much. Emma hugged her with the unself-conscious affection of someone who'd learned that accepting gratitude mattered as much as offering help. Thank you for coming. And for the cake. It's beautiful. Later that night, after guests had departed and the house had been cleaned, Rachel and Emma sat together on the couch in the living room where the medicine cabinet hung on the wall. The cabinet had become a kind of shrine, a reminder of where they'd come from and the values they were trying to maintain. Mom, do you ever regret finding the coins? Like, was life easier when we were just poor and nobody expected anything from us? The question was more complicated than it sounded. Rachel thought about the past 2 years, the family betrayals, the lost friendships, the constant pressure of managing resources and defending decisions and navigating the space between generosity and obligation. Sometimes I miss the simplicity. When we were poor, the choices were clear because options were limited. Now every choice has implications, and every decision affects people beyond just us. But you don't regret it? No, baby. I don't regret it. Because we've been able to help people who needed it. Because you've learned things about money and character and human nature that most people never understand. Because we've built something that matters more than comfort. Emma processed this in a thoughtful way that characterized her approach to difficult concepts. Uncle Alejandro knew this would be hard, didn't he? That's why he hid the money for so long. Because having it creates different problems than not having it. Yeah, I think he understood exactly what he was giving us. Opportunity and burden in equal measure. Spring brought unexpected complication in the form of a lawsuit filed by Mariana and 2 cousins Rachel barely knew. The legal complaint alleged that Alejandro had lacked mental capacity when writing his will, that he'd been unduly influenced by Rachel during his final months despite the fact that Rachel hadn't seen him in 15 years, that the inheritance should be distributed equally among all surviving relatives. The lawsuit was transparently frivolous, but it was also legally actionable, requiring response and defense and expenditure of resources Rachel would rather have directed toward the foundation's work. Marcus Chun reviewed the complaint with barely concealed disgust. This is harassment dressed up as litigation. Your sister knows she'll lose, but she's betting that the cost and hassle of defending will pressure you into settlement. What kind of settlement would she accept? Probably $100,000 or more. Enough to make filing worthwhile for her. Emma had been listening from the corner where she'd been doing homework. So she's using the legal system to extort money she has no right to claim? That's one way to describe it, yes. Can we countersue for that? for filing a frivolous lawsuit designed to force settlement? Marcus smiled with genuine pleasure. We can, and we will. I'm going to make this so expensive and unpleasant for your aunt that she'll regret ever hiring an attorney. The legal battle consumed 6 months of intermittent hearings, depositions, and procedural maneuvers. Mariana's attorney produced witnesses who claimed Alejandro had shown signs of dementia, had been confused about family relationships, had been vulnerable to manipulation by Rachel despite the complete absence of contact between them. Marcus methodically destroyed each claim. He presented medical records showing Alejandro had been mentally sharp until weeks before his death. He introduced testimony from Father Miguel and other Tierra Encantada residents who'd known Alejandro well and could attest to his clarity and intention. He played the video of Alejandro explaining his will, demonstrating obvious competence and explicit reasoning. Most devastatingly, he introduced evidence that Mariana had borrowed $15,000 from Alejandro 5 years earlier and never repaid it, that she'd missed his birthday for 12 consecutive years, that she'd refused to visit when he'd been hospitalized with pneumonia in 2019. The hearing where Mariana testified became the turning point. Under cross-examination, she crumbled, her prepared narrative falling apart when confronted with documented evidence of her own neglect and opportunism. Ms. Mercer, you testified that you had a close relationship with your uncle. Can you name his birthday? It was in the spring, March or April. January 17th. Can you name a town where he lived? New Mexico somewhere. Tierra Encantada. Can you describe a single conversation you had with him in the 5 years before his death? Silence. Ms. Mercer, isn't it true that your sudden interest in your uncle's mental capacity correlates exactly with your knowledge that he left substantial assets to your sister? That's not. I cared about him. Please answer yes or no. Yes, but that doesn't mean no further questions. Judge Robert Martinez delivered his ruling from the bench without taking time for written opinion. This lawsuit is transparently motivated by greed rather than genuine concern about testamentary capacity. Mr. Reyes's will is crystal clear. His video testimony demonstrates obvious competence, and the plaintiff has failed to present credible evidence suggesting otherwise. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees to the defendant in the amount of $43,000 to be paid by the plaintiff within 60 days. Frivolous litigation wastes court resources and causes unnecessary harm. Such behavior deserves sanction. Mariana left the courtroom in tears. Her attorney looked professionally embarrassed. Rachel felt no satisfaction in the victory, only exhaustion and sadness that family had degraded to this. Lawsuits and accusations and relationships destroyed by the same money that was supposed to create opportunity. Emma, who'd attended the hearing despite Rachel's reservations about exposing her to family ugliness, had a different perspective. Mom, you didn't destroy the relationship. Aunt Mariana did. She chose money over family. That's not your fault. I know, but it still hurts. Yeah, but hurt means you still care. That's better than not feeling anything. The lawsuit's dismissal freed resources and attention for the foundation's work. Rachel and Maria had refined their approach over 2 years, developing protocols for vetting applications, identifying genuine crisis, and providing comprehensive support rather than temporary relief. They'd also learned to say no with confidence rather than guilt, to recognize that finite resources required difficult choices, that helping everyone inadequately served no one well, that boundaries protected the foundation's ability to continue operating. One afternoon in late July, 3 years after discovering the coins, Rachel received a call from Gregory Vance, the numismatic expert who'd appraised the original collection. Ms. Santos, I wanted to reach out because something interesting has come to my attention. I recently appraised an estate in Denver that included a handwritten journal from the 1890s. The author describes accumulating gold coins and building a medicine cabinet specifically designed to hide them. The author's name is Tomas Reyes. Rachel felt something shift in her understanding of family history. Uncle Alejandro's grandfather. Exactly. The journal describes his reasoning. He'd watched the panic of 1893 destroy families who'd kept their wealth in banks. He decided to accumulate hard currency and hide it so well that even immediate family wouldn't know. He planned to tell his son about it eventually, but died before he could. The secret passed down accidentally rather than intentionally. So, the coins weren't meant to be hidden for a century. They were supposed to be revealed within a generation. Correct. Your uncle discovered them purely by chance when doing repair work. The journal makes clear that Tomas intended the coins as insurance for his descendants, not as a treasure for strangers to discover after everyone who knew about them had died. Where is this journal now? That's why I'm calling. The estate is selling at auction next month. I thought you might want to acquire it. Complete the story, understand the full context of what your uncle left you. The journal sold for $2,800, a price that felt insignificant compared to its historical and personal value. Rachel read it cover to cover the night it arrived, Emma beside her, both of them absorbing the words of a man who died before either of them was born, but whose decisions had shaped their lives in ways he couldn't have imagined. Tomas wrote in careful Spanish about the economic devastation he'd witnessed, about families losing everything to bank failures and currency collapse, about his determination to protect his descendants from similar disaster. He described building the medicine cabinet with hidden cavity, choosing materials that would last generations, crafting it as both functional object and protective vault. His final entry, dated 3 weeks before his death, carried particular weight. I have built security for my son and his children. I will tell Miguel tomorrow about the coins. He must know before I am gone, must understand that this wealth is not for spending, but for protection, for crisis, for the moment when everything else has failed. Money kept secret serves no purpose if the secret dies with me. But he died before that conversation could happen, and the secret had persisted across 4 generations until accident revealed what intention had meant to share. Emma read the entry twice, then looked at her mother with understanding dawning across her features. Uncle Alejandro did exactly what Tomas planned. He kept the coins for crisis, for the moment when everything else failed, and then he gave them to you when you needed them most. Yeah, the money waited 100 years to do what it was always supposed to do. That night, Rachel updated her will with provisions she'd been contemplating for months. The foundation would be funded in perpetuity from the remaining inheritance principal, with professional management ensuring it could continue operations after she was gone. Emma would inherit enough to be comfortable, but not so much that wealth would define her life. The medicine cabinet would pass to Emma with instructions to preserve it and the story it represented. She included a letter, following Alejandro's example, explaining her reasoning and values. Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're making decisions about what to do with what I've left you. I hope I've taught you through example rather than instruction, but some things deserve explicit statement. The money from Uncle Alejandro's coins changed our lives, but more importantly, it revealed character in our family, in our friends, in ourselves. Some people saw opportunity to serve. Others saw opportunity to take. The difference between those responses defines who deserves trust and who deserves boundaries. I've watched you grow into someone who understands that wealth means responsibility rather than freedom from responsibility, that having resources creates obligation to use them wisely, that generosity requires judgment as much as compassion. The foundation exists to help people in genuine crisis, to provide the kind of assistance we needed and couldn't find during our hardest months. Continue that work if it matters to you, or direct the resources elsewhere if you find more effective ways to serve. But remember that helping some people well serves the mission better than helping everyone inadequately. I'm proud of who you've become. I'm grateful for the second chance Uncle Alejandro's gift provided. I hope you'll use whatever you inherit to build a life that matters rather than just a life that's comfortable. The medicine cabinet stays in the family. It represents values worth preserving. The foresight to plan for crisis, the wisdom to protect wealth from those who would misuse it, the understanding that some inheritances transcend material value. With love, Mom. Emma read the letter over Rachel's shoulder as she wrote it. Mom, I'm 14. You're not dying anytime soon. I know, But Tomas died before he could explain the coins to his son. Alejandro had to figure it out himself. I don't want you to have to figure things out alone. I want you to have the context and the reasoning. Then you should tell me now, while you're alive, to explain it. The observation was characteristically direct and completely correct. Rachel set aside the letter and turned to face her daughter. Okay, here's what I want you to understand. Money is a tool, not a goal. It solves material problems, but it doesn't create meaning or relationships or purpose. Those things come from how you choose to use resources, not from simply having them. Uncle Alejandro lived modestly and died having enriched dozens of lives. He could have used the coins to buy comfort, but he chose to keep them as insurance and eventually as gift to someone who needed them. That choice matters more than the dollar value of what he left. You've seen how wealth reveals character. You've watched family become strangers and strangers become allies. You've learned that some people value you for what you have rather than who you are. Those lessons are worth more than the inheritance itself. Emma absorbed this with the seriousness she brought to concepts that required integration rather than memorization. So the point isn't to keep the money or spend the money. The point is to understand what the money means and let that understanding guide choices. Exactly. And the medicine cabinet represents all of that. The planning and the protecting and the choosing to serve rather than consume. Yeah, baby. That's exactly what it represents. 4 years after the discovery, Rachel stood in the foundation office reviewing annual reports with Maria and their board of directors. The foundation had helped 34 families over the past year, distributing $287,000 in comprehensive assistance that included housing, utilities, transportation, and follow-up support services. The success rate was remarkable. 82% of families served had achieved stable housing 1 year after receiving assistance. Compare that to the 31% success rate typical of emergency relief programs that provided minimal intervention without follow-up. Emma, now 15 and serving as junior board member, presented data analysis she'd conducted showing correlation between comprehensive support and long-term stability. Her presentation was professional, data-driven, and reflected sophistication about poverty dynamics that most adults never developed. The families who received our support averaged $14,200 per case. Traditional emergency programs averaged $2,800 per case, but serve 5 times as many families. Our success rate is 6 times higher, meaning each dollar we spend produces better outcomes, even though we help fewer people overall. One board member, a retired social worker named Dorothy Martinez, asked the question Rachel had been anticipating. So, we're choosing quality over quantity? Helping fewer families more effectively rather than more families less effectively? Exactly, Emma confirmed. Because helping someone survive 1 more month doesn't change their situation. Helping them achieve actual stability creates lasting improvement. The board approved the annual report and budget unanimously. As the meeting adjourned, Dorothy pulled Rachel aside. Your daughter is remarkable. She understands systems, thinking most professionals take decades to develop. She's a good teacher. Poverty and windfall both taught lessons. Will she continue the foundation's work? Rachel looked at Emma, who was discussing data methodology with another board member with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely engaged rather than performing interest. That'll be her choice, but I think she understands what matters. That summer, Rachel made a decision she'd been contemplating for months. She reached out to Mariana through an intermediary, offering a meeting without preconditions or expectations. Her sister responded after 3 weeks of apparent deliberation. They met in a neutral coffee shop in Albuquerque, sitting across from each other with the awkwardness of people who shared history but no longer shared trust. Mariana looked older, worn in ways that suggested the past 4 years hadn't been kind. Why did you want to meet? Mariana's voice carried suspicion rather than curiosity. Because you're my sister. Because family should mean more than legal battles and inheritance fights. Because I'm tired of anger. You won. You got everything. What more do you want? I don't want anything from you. I want to tell you that I'm sorry our family degraded to this. lawsuits and accusations and relationships destroyed by money. I'm sorry Uncle Alejandro's gift became a source of conflict rather than blessing. Mariana's expression shifted through surprise towards something that might have been shame. I was desperate. My husband left. I had debts. When I heard about the coins, I thought it was the answer to everything. Money doesn't answer everything. It just reveals what's already there. I know that now. The lawsuit cost me $43,000 I didn't have. I filed bankruptcy last year. Lost the house. I'm living with my daughter in a 2-bedroom apartment and working retail at 54 years old. Rachel felt sympathy compete with boundaries she'd learned to maintain. I'm sorry you're struggling. I genuinely am. But I can't help you financially. Every time I've helped family members, it's created expectations that destroyed relationships. I won't do that again. I'm not asking for money. I wanted you to know I regret the lawsuit. I regret how I treated you. I regret choosing greed over family. The apology felt genuine, carried weight that earlier attempts at reconciliation had lacked. Rachel sat with it, testing whether forgiveness could coexist with boundaries, whether relationship could survive betrayal. I appreciate you saying that. I'm willing to rebuild connection, but it has to be based on who we are now, not who we were before everything changed. And it can't involve financial expectations from me. I understand. They met monthly after that, carefully reconstructing relationship that acknowledged damage rather than pretending it hadn't occurred. The connection was different, more honest, less comfortable, stripped of the illusions that had characterized their earlier dynamic. But it was real, and reality mattered more than comfort. Emma was skeptical initially. Mom, she sued us. She tried to take Uncle Alejandro's gift. Why would you forgive that? Because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts her. Because family is complicated and people are capable of change. Because Uncle Alejandro chose forgiveness over bitterness, even when he had every right to be bitter. But what if she's just pretending to apologize to get access to money later? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'd rather risk being hurt again than live in permanent suspicion of everyone's motives. Emma processed this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. So forgiveness doesn't mean trusting completely. It means giving people another chance to prove who they really are. Yeah, baby, that's exactly what it means. 5 years after the discovery, the foundation hosted a reunion event for families they'd served. 73 people attended, representing 28 families who'd received assistance and achieved stability. The event was held at a community center the foundation had helped fund, and the atmosphere combined gratitude with genuine celebration. The Johnson family brought their oldest daughter, now 17 and about to start college on a scholarship she'd earned through academic achievement. Patricia pulled Rachel aside with tears in her eyes. You saved our family, not just from homelessness, but from the despair that comes from believing nothing will ever get better. You gave us hope and resources and the belief that we deserved better than what we'd been experiencing. You saved yourselves. We just provided support while you did the hard work. No, the support made the work possible. Before you helped us, we were drowning. Every day was crisis. We couldn't plan for tomorrow because we were barely surviving today. You gave us breathing room to actually make changes instead of just reacting to emergencies. Thomas Johnson joined them, his work-roughened hands gripping Rachel's with gratitude that needed no words. Their 4 children played with Emma and other teenagers in the corner, laughing with the unself-conscious joy of young people who'd survived hardship but hadn't been destroyed by it. Emma caught Rachel's eye across the room and smiled with the satisfaction of someone who understood they participated in something meaningful. At 15, she'd already learned lessons about wealth and character and service that some people never grasped across entire lifetimes. That night, back in their home, Rachel and Emma sat together in the living room where the medicine cabinet hung on the wall. The cabinet had become a kind of touchstone, a physical reminder of the journey they'd traveled from poverty to windfall to purpose. Mom, do you think Uncle Alejandro knew what would happen? Did he know the coins would lead to all of this? The foundation, the families we've helped, the lessons we've learned? Rachel thought about Alejandro's letter, about his careful choice of recipient, about his understanding that wealth revealed character rather than creating it. I think he knew enough. He knew giving money to someone unprepared would destroy rather than help. He knew choosing the right person mattered more than choosing the richest person. He knew that some inheritances transcend material value. And he chose you because you understood what mattered. He chose me because I hadn't asked for anything. Because I'd accepted his choices without judgment. Because he believed I'd use the gift wisely rather than just use it selfishly. Emma stood and walked to the medicine cabinet, running her fingers over the carved patterns Tomas Reyes had created more than a century earlier. This is going to be mine someday. When I have it, I want to remember everything it represents, the planning and the protecting and the choosing to serve. You will, baby, because you've lived the lessons rather than just learning them. 10 years after the discovery, Rachel stood in the same living room, though much had changed. Emma was 21, graduating from college with degrees in social work and nonprofit management, preparing to take over the foundation's daily operations. The organization had helped 217 families over the past decade, maintaining an 86% success rate in achieving long-term housing stability. The foundation had grown beyond Rachel's original vision, partnering with other nonprofits, advocating for policy changes, providing training to other emergency assistance programs. The model they developed, comprehensive support for fewer families rather than minimal intervention for many, had been adopted by organizations in 4 states. Emma's commencement speech that spring addressed themes she'd lived rather than merely studied. We talk about poverty as though it's a character flaw rather than a circumstance. As though people are poor because they make bad choices rather than because they're trapped in systems designed to keep them struggling. My mother and I were poor not because we were lazy or foolish, but because life happens. Divorce, job loss, illness, all the normal crises that become catastrophic when you have no resources to absorb them. What changed our situation wasn't hard work. We've been working hard all along. What changed was access to resources at exactly the moment when those resources could make a difference. An inheritance we didn't know existed, discovered purely by chance, transforming our lives through luck rather than merit. I've spent 10 years watching my mother build an organization designed to provide for others what we received: comprehensive support during crisis, resources adequate to create actual change, and the belief that people deserve help not because they've proven themselves worthy, but simply because they're human beings in need. That's the lesson I'm taking from my education and my experience. That help should be based on need rather than judgment. That comprehensive support works better than minimal intervention, and that we measure success not by how many people we serve, but by how many people we actually help achieve stability. The real inheritance I received wasn't money. It was the understanding that wealth means responsibility, that having resources creates obligation to use them wisely, and that some legacies transcend material value. Rachel sat in the audience, crying with pride that had nothing to do with academic achievement and everything to do with character revealed through choices made across years of challenge and growth. After the ceremony, Emma introduced Rachel to her thesis advisor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, who'd specialized in poverty research for 3 decades. Ms. Santos, Emma's work on comprehensive emergency assistance has been exceptional. She's developed frameworks for evaluating program effectiveness that challenge conventional wisdom about serving the maximum number of people versus serving smaller populations more completely. She learned by doing. The foundation became her laboratory. The best education combines theory and practice. Emma has both. That evening, Emma and Rachel drove to Tierra Encantada, making the pilgrimage they'd established as annual tradition. They visited Alejandro's grave, now marked with a simple stone Rachel had commissioned, Alejandro Reyes, 1940 to 2024. He understood that wealth means opportunity to serve. They walked through the small house Rachel still owned and maintained as transitional housing for families in crisis. The current residents, a young couple with twin toddlers, kept the space clean and cared for, adding their own small touches while respecting the history that saturated every surface. The medicine cabinet hung in the hallway of their Albuquerque home, but a photograph of it occupied the place of honor in Alejandro's house, with a plaque explaining its significance. This medicine cabinet, built in 1889, concealed wealth that changed lives across 4 generations. It represents the values of planning, protection, and service that define this family's legacy. Emma stood in front of the photograph with Rachel beside her. "Mom, when the cabinet becomes mine, I want to keep it exactly where it is. Not hidden away, but visible. A reminder of where we came from and the values we're trying to maintain." "That's perfect, baby." They drove back to Albuquerque as the sun set, painting desert in colors that seemed too intense to be natural. The landscape that had once felt empty now felt full of possibility. Every empty space a potential site for growth and transformation. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you think we did what Uncle Alejandro wanted? Like, if he could see what we built with his gift, would he be proud?" Rachel thought about the question carefully, measuring their decade of work against the values Alejandro had lived and the legacy he'd chosen to leave. "I think he'd see that we understood the real gift wasn't money. The real gift was the opportunity to learn that wealth reveals character, that some things can't be bought, that helping others matters more than accumulating comfort. And yeah, I think he'd be proud." Emma smiled with satisfaction that came from living according to principles that mattered. "Then we did it right." The medicine cabinet remained on their wall, a physical reminder of inheritance that transcended material value. The coins were gone, transformed into comprehensive assistance for families in crisis, into stability for people who'd been drowning, into hope for those who'd stopped believing circumstances could improve. But the cabinet itself endured. Handcrafted wood that had outlasted its creator, hidden cavity that had protected wealth across a century, carved patterns that represented values worth preserving. Rachel stood before it sometimes, running her fingers over the same surfaces Tomas Reyes had shaped in 1889, feeling connection to ancestors she'd never known, but whose choices had shaped her life in ways they couldn't have imagined. Emma would inherit the cabinet someday, would maintain it and the story it represented, would pass both to her own children with instructions to remember that some legacies matter more than money, that character revealed through crisis defines families more completely than wealth accumulated through luck. The medicine cabinet that Rachel's family had mocked, the inheritance they dismissed as worthless junk, had become the foundation of purpose and service and meaning that transcended any dollar value the coins might have carried. In the end, Alejandro had left them exactly what they needed. Not just resources to survive, but lessons about using resources to serve, about boundaries that protected generosity from becoming exploitation, about the difference between wealth that corrupts and wealth that clarifies. The cabinet hung on the wall, empty now of coins but full of significance, testament to the truth that the most valuable inheritances can't be spent or sold or divided among people who mistake material value for actual worth. It was in every sense that mattered, the perfect gift, arriving exactly when needed, revealing character through response, teaching lessons that would resonate across generations of a family that had learned to measure wealth by impact rather than accumulation. And in the quiet of their home, where a medicine cabinet built in 1889 bore witness to transformation that spanned more than a century, Rachel and Emma understood that they'd been given something far more precious than $427,000 in gold coins. They'd been given the chance to become people who understood what truly mattered, who used resources to serve rather than simply to consume, who measured success by lives changed rather than dollars accumulated. The inheritance, in the end, was wisdom, and wisdom, unlike gold, only grew more valuable the more it was shared. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.